Hello, and welcome to Draft Digital Spotlight. My name is Mark Leslie Lefebvre, and I'm honored to have in the virtual studio with me, Scott Overton. Scott, welcome.
It's always great to talk to you, Mark. Honored, I don't know about, but it's good to talk to you.
Yeah, well, it's good to catch up with you. Where are you in the world? Because I know that even the technology to connect is a little bit iffy.
I'm on mobile internet. It's a cellular thing because I'm living in a kind of a rural place. So I don't think we'll have any issues. It's generally pretty good. Okay. And but I do live out on a private island on a lake in northern Ontario.
Oh, that sounds blissful. It sounds.
I'm feeling a mosquito getting my arm here. Yeah.
Except for the mosquitoes.
Except for the mosquitoes. If I swat, it's legitimate. It's not a twitch.
So you are, I'm thinking you're on this picturesque lake in beautiful northern Ontario. You're writing full time, living the dream.
Yeah.
But it wasn't always that way.
Well, it isn't that way either, really. Well, the part about living in an idyllic spot is, but living the dream, well, everything has its challenges, right? No, yeah. I was a career radio broadcaster, morning show host for, most of my 30 plus years in radio.
Okay.
Yeah. And most of it in Northern Ontario, which is, is home turf for you too.
Okay. So I'm curious about the parallels between radio morning show host, because I remember hearing your voice on the airwaves every weekday. And the radio host that has to come up with content every single day, right? You for hours at a time. And I know you're not talking hours at a time because you got music and guests and other things going on, but
yeah, I was in private radio, so I wasn't full-time talking.
Right.
Yeah. Well, you come up with the content all over the place. Obviously there's lots and lots of content out there, and so you can read up on it and work. I would work in the evenings because I did a morning show. I'd work in the evenings and put it all together and then ad lib from there. But you generally like to have an idea of what your content's going to be, what point you're going to make, where you're going to end.
Okay, so almost like outlining for a novel then, right?
It is, but of course a lot shorter pieces, be closer to flash fiction than long-term stuff.
So what was it? Was it like cue cards? What did you use? What was I'm just curious about how that would work. Did you just make notes? You're having dinner and you're like, oh, this is a good thing we're gonna bring up tomorrow, or?
Well, even then there were recording devices and I could make notes to myself, whether it's on my phone or whatever, and then just work at it on the computer, print it off, and go from there. It's radio, so nobody at that point was seeing me, and I could talk from a page if I wanted, or from a computer screen.
Okay, that's cool. And then I know you also co-hosted for some of the time that you were in radio?
I had a co-hosted for a few of the years. That's a different kind of thing, because you kind of say, okay, well, the song's running. You say, okay, so we're going to do this bit about blah, blah, blah. How about I start off with this, and you can talk about what you want, and we'll kind of roughly end up here.
Okay, so that the collaboration was potentially one person brings the ideas, or did you, like in the morning when you got into the studio, did you talk about the notes you each had, or how did?
No, we both brought ideas. But, we'd have a discussion usually with our program director about some of the things that we wanted to talk about, directions we wanted to go in or whatever. Because a lot has to do when you're working with a partner with bringing out your characters and your interpersonal dynamic back and forth, right? So it's not the same as doing a solo show where you're just delivering content with your own personality. There, the focus becomes more your interaction back and forth.
Okay. Now, have you ever collaborated on writing, or is writing a solo enterprise?
I haven't, no. And I haven't really even thought about it much because it just seems such a really personal thing to do, writing, that I don't know how I would possibly collaborate with people. I don't understand how people do it. I know they do. Lots of people do. You have collaborated yourself. But I don't know how you do it, and especially when it comes to fiction, because it's in your mind, it's in your imagination, and how do you take it from there and then work it with people? I guess there could be parallels with working on a radio show, but it's strange territory to me.
Oh, interesting. Well, let's talk about, so about 30 years in radio. Were you always writing on the side, or where did this passion for writing come from?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I've been writing since I was a kid. When our family would have big get-togethers and I was 3 or 4 years old and could scribble, I would be going on a corner and writing stories. Always wanted to do it. I tried it briefly when we first got married, my wife and I, but didn't have the chance to give it enough time. It takes quite a while.
Right.
And I don't look back on those early writings very fondly. They were, not very good. But later on in my radio career, once I got things stabilized and was staying in one place and felt I had a handle on it, then I started devoting as much spare time as I could to my writing. Yeah. So I would say not from the very beginning of my radio career, but later on. And probably the last 10 to 15 years of it, I was writing as well.
Okay, cool. And was it? I know you're a short story writer as well as a novelist as well. What was it that you were working on? Was it stories? Was it novel length works?
Most of it was probably my first novel. That took at least 5 years to write, and it was based on radio. They always say, write what you know. So I figured there aren't all that many novels about the radio world. There are a few, but people are curious about it because they spend a lot of time with these radio hosts. They're like people and you think they're like friends or neighbors. And to give them a little bit of a behind-the-scenes look at the radio industry, first off, I thought was a good idea. But then I also explored the vulnerability that we have as small C celebrities. We're sort of big fish in a small pond or big frogs in a small pond, but not major celebrities like Hollywood. At the same time, there is a little bit of vulnerability there because everybody knows us and we don't necessarily know them. So that's what I explored in my first novel, Dead Air, which you were very kind enough to give me a blurb back then. And yeah, that was good.
Well, I want to get into that because this novel still resonates with me as a reader. So it was a thriller about, again, a smaller town, smaller city radio DJ personality whose life is threatened because of this relationship or this perceived relationship that happens. And it was really interesting because I had been in studios before. I'd been in your studio once and several other radio studios, but never really understanding that life that we perceive right on this side of the radio. So that was originally published with a small Canadian press.
Right, a local regional press. And the story, the germ of the idea came from a true event, but not in my life. Okay. Another morning man that I had known had his young daughter kind of followed home from school, and somebody said, I know who you are, I know who your dad is. And ooh, it was just slightly threatening. And he was, terrified at that. So it was one of those things where those kinds of things can happen. And in the novel, the guy says something, and that seems to trigger this death threat against him. But he has no idea who it is who has been making death threats. And the threats, of course, escalate into harassment and then more violence.
Wow, cool. Well, I can't recommend the novel enough. Now, this publisher, you now own the rights to this, right? It was originally
That's
published
right.
by them? Okay.
Yeah, it was a company called Scrivener Press, and the publisher was a wonderful guy who then retired a few years after my novel Dead Air came out, and he very generously gave me back not only the rights, because he was closing the press down, but also the documents that he had when he'd first published it. So it made it a lot, including cover art and that kind of thing. So it made it a lot easier for me to then publish a second edition in print on demand, to keep it in print and that sort of thing, as well as an ebook. I had convinced him to make it an ebook, and it was one of his first ebooks.
Was it really?
Yeah. Wow. I don't know if he had ever had one before. He might have had one before, but it was certainly one of the first.
Oh, that's cool. So now you own all the rights to Dead Air. It's available in print. Yep. It's available in ebook. I believe you have a really awesome narrator who's also done the audiobook for that. Is that true?
I did narrate that myself, and I narrated it myself when I was still working in radio, so I was able to do that. My bosses gave me permission to do it in the radio studio that I worked in. Ooh, wow. So that worked out well. And I decided to try a bunch of different things. Now, Terry Fallis, who, and Terry Fallis believes in bringing out his books, which are Canadian humor books, as podcasts. And so he does that first, and he still does that. Even though he's got, publishing deals with traditional publishers, he still brings them out as podcasts. So I tried doing that, and then turned it into an audiobook, and I have it in a number of various forms. You can get the podcast at my website, which you've posted on screen a few times.
Which is scottoverton.ca for anyone listening.
Or .com, which also redirects there. I have both domains.
Oh,
so
cool.
You can get to the podcast and subscribe to the podcast there, or at iTunes, Dead Air, Scott Overton. You should be able to find it.
And you should be able to find it at Audible or Google or Apple.
Audible. I also, I distribute the audiobook through Authors Republic. Yeah, and I'm, considering other venues, other places to put the audiobook out, but I'm not sure the advantages always.
Okay, cool. So what was that experience like? I mean, you living so many years in a studio and doing short clips, between songs, between sets, interviewing folks, and then a long narrative. Did you have to retrain yourself?
It's the same skills, but we're not used to talking for that length of time. And so when you're recording an audiobook, you're talking, you're going along, and I still have to kind of do it in chunks. I don't want to do 20 minutes or 30 minutes at a time, but I'll read it, and if you flub something, you can just stop, start again. And thank heaven for digital technology. I don't know how you would have done it before, having digital workstations, because that makes it so much easier. You just stop, you back up a sentence or so, you start again or whatever, just so we have a nice clean cut that you can make there. And it's much easier to do that. But it's a lot of work. And I have done things for you, Mark, and you might get an hour of finished work that will take 5, 6, 7, 8 hours, depending on how difficult it is, or how picky you are, or whether you're having a good day with your voice and your mouth noises and who knows what. It's not an easy thing.
What are mouth noises?
Saliva noises and things. If you've got a quality microphone, it picks up your voice well and makes it sound good, but it also picks up every little noise. So every little saliva bubble or crackle in your teeth or, tongue, it really does that. So you then have to be careful about what you're drinking. You always want to keep your mouth moist. You don't want to get dehydrated, and certain beverages will make your mouth stickier. Some people use certain kinds of gum to try to clean that up, and that's a tough thing.
So can you recommend what are some of the beverages to avoid, and what are some of the ones that are...
I would think anything sticky is going to be something to avoid. Okay,
like lemonade or something like that.
Yeah, I can't say that I've tried it after drinking lemonade, but I can't think that'd be a good experience. So, plain water's probably best as far as drinking. Or I find clear tea. I drink my tea clear, and that's not too bad.
Clear tea, maybe clear coffee with a cream and sugar.
Maybe. I don't, I have cream in it. Sometimes that doesn't work so well. But it's still not a science that I've figured out, and I've been doing it for a while.
Well, because you're familiar with audio, I want to get into that in a bit. I want to go backtrack. Your first novel was a thriller, Dead Air. But I know you as a science fiction writer, and isn't that like most of the rest of the stuff that you've written in the science fiction?
Absolutely, all of it is science fiction and fantasy. Dead Air is the one thing that isn't. And that was, again, because of the write what you know thing. I really thought that would be kind of a good niche to start out and, be interesting to people. But beyond that, I've been a science fiction fan as a reader for all my life. And so what I write, I would call science fiction and possibly speculative fiction and possibly fantasy, but not what you would think of with elves, a la Tolkien, not Game of Thrones, but just offbeat kind of things that don't necessarily involve science, but are off the beaten path when it comes to reality.
So maybe urban fantasy-esque, or
not so much that.
Yeah.
No, but it's kind of hard to describe. My first story that I sold was to the science fiction and fantasy magazine On Spec, which is a Canadian institution.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like almost a fable or fairy tale type tone to it.
Okay.
So it was more literary spec fic rather than science fiction.
And
but most things I write are science fiction.
And you have a new science fiction novel that just came out, I think, just in the last month or so, didn't it?
About a month ago. It's called The Primus Labyrinth. And that one I wrote quite a long time ago. And it is a science fiction thriller. I find that now I've written actually about 9 complete science fiction novel-sized manuscripts to this point, which have not been published.
Sorry, how many?
9.
Okay.
And considering one that I just finished, a sort of first, second, third draft, whatever you want to consider it. And there are reasons for that. I don't know whether we'll get into them, but The Primus Labyrinth was the first science fiction novel that I wrote, and it has definite thriller elements, and most of them do. But at the same time, I'm a big fan of Robert J. Sawyer, as I know you are, and some of the greats in science fiction who wrote about meaningful things. So it wasn't just one darn thing after another. Just, space battles or pirates in space or any of those kinds of things. I want to take an issue that's kind of important themes, and write science fiction stories about them.
Okay. So what's the Primus Labyrinth?
The Primus Labyrinth.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the plot is a coercion plot against the American president, in which a VIP very close to him has her bloodstream seeded with biochemical bombs that are very, very small devices but can trigger blood clots. They release chemicals that can trigger blood clots. Therefore, they can be injurious or fatal. So other than giving in to these people, and the president doesn't know who it is, the only other hope is a nanoscopic submersible and a pilot who pilots it by virtual reality. I'm sure you're familiar with Fantastic Voyage.
Yeah, it almost sounds like Fantastic Voyage meets some sort of assassination. I'm trying to think of
Well, Fantastic Voyage was great. They 1960s movie. I loved it. And they used a shrink ray to shrink a real size submersible.
You don't have shrink rays, do you?
No, and it's never been well explained. Isaac Asimov tried to explain it scientifically in a sequel that he wrote to it. He did a novelization of it and a sequel as well. And the explanations just never came off for me. But I thought that's great territory for science fiction, the bloodstream, the human bloodstream.
Right.
But how would it actually be done? Because scientists, of course, are working with nanotechnology and medical applications very, very widespread. It's a big area, and they're making great strides. So mine is a nanoscopic, virus-sized, I just had a mosquito blow by me, microscopic, virus-sized submersible. It doesn't have people inside it. But the pilot, who is a real-life submersible pilot, pilots it through virtual reality. It
broadcasts, like a drone, basically. Like, okay.
Yes. Yeah.
All right.
But the transmission makes a virtual reality environment for the pilot.
Of course.
So he sees and experiences as much as possible what that drone is going through, that submersible, which is called the Primus. Hence the Primus Labyrinth. The labyrinth is the bloodstream.
Oh,
but
cool.
He has latent, what you'd call extrasensory abilities that make a stronger connection, a stronger link to this submersible, so that virtual reality pretty much gives way to reality to him. He perceives it as reality. And that's where the crux of the novel is, because he has really hard, really difficult issues with it. He's kind of suffering PTSD from an earlier submersible accident and has a real problem with navigating through someone's bloodstream who is not aware of it.
Okay. So it sounds like, this very similar to a lot of Robert J. Sawyer's novels. This is kind of like near real-time science fiction. So it's just like this one or two bits of technology that's a little bit more advanced than what we have now.
Yeah, I'm always afraid that the technology is going to catch up with my books, my novels. And that is, yeah, exactly it. I write near future. And sometimes I've gone a few hundred years in the future, but not farther than that. And usually if I do, something has happened that has stunted the progress, technological progress, so I don't try to envision technology 300 years from now. Imagine, how wrong we've gone in predictions of technology in the past 50 years.
Right.
Trying to see 300 years out into the future is beyond me,
Okay. Well, maybe
So,
we'll have
yes.
these devices one day in our pockets that are more powerful than the room-sized computers.
Well, exactly.
And we could talk to each
Exactly
other.
that. And
Yeah.
you could talk to each other and you could do other things on them. It's exactly that. Now, I believe that the next thing that will take over from smartphones is actual brain-computer interfaces, probably either implanted in your skull or, attached very closely.
Right. Yeah, like
maybe hung behind your ear or stuck onto a, whatever.
tattoo-ish, something like that.
But
I can't lose it that way, right?
But direct brain-computer interfacing.
Yeah.
And I think that'll happen. And a novel that I wrote, which has not been published, was about that. But I'm always afraid that technology is going to catch up with my novel before it can be published.
So let's go to the logistics for a second. You've got 9 books, two novels published, but you have 9 manuscripts out there. What is the plan with these manuscripts? Where are they sitting? What's going on?
It's an interesting area because, sure, a lot of people that are listening right now are wondering about the whole question of self-publishing versus traditional publishing, getting an agent, all those things.
Right.
And what happened was that with this novel that I'm talking about the brain-computer interface, I got an agent based in New York, very, very well-connected agency with terrific history with some of the classic writers of science fiction. I thought, this is a guaranteed thing. Well, it's not a guaranteed thing. And after more than 3 years, although I had a junior agent, I was one of his first clients, nothing happened. The manuscript never attracted a contract offer. So although the boss at the agency considered it a powerful novel, and she represented Heinlein and Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle. And
heavy hitters.
Yes. So that's probably giving it away a bit. But anyway, it didn't work out. So it's not a guaranteed thing. Now, was the problem with the approach from the agents? He got it to good people. I know the editors, but just didn't happen. And some of it's bad luck. One of the editors that he got the manuscript to was the superstar science fiction editor, David G. Hartwell. I don't know if you
one of the best. Yeah.
I would say the best.
Yeah.
Got it to him, but if you know the story, David G. Hartwell had a fall on his stairs and died of a brain injury. And I'll never know whether he actually read my manuscript or any of that. Yeah. It was right at that time. So, these things happen, but that's the story. So getting back to those other manuscripts, of course, having an agent, I didn't think it was wise to self-publish the other manuscripts as I wrote them. He didn't really want me to, naturally. And so for 3.5 years, I didn't publish anything, didn't self-publish anything. And, it's a very available thing. It's, as you've said many times in your talks, there's never been a better time to be a writer as far as the availability of it. But I've always said I didn't want to self-publish anything that hadn't been professionally edited.
Right.
Because you can't really see your own work. You're too close to it. If there are slow spots or character things that just don't work or plot things that just don't work, you don't see it. I'm very good at editing as far as getting rid of typos and grammatical errors. But beyond that, I can't see the big picture, so I need an editor. And, that's a whole other kind of thing. It costs money, takes time.
Okay. So is this right now, are you still with this agent for some of these manuscripts? Are you slowly? Okay.
No, we agreed to part ways. And I'm still open to having an agent and open to publishing by traditional methods. I still approach agents, still pitch to agents. But that's a very, very slow process. And there's tons and tons of rejection.
Right.
My wife says, I don't know how you do it facing rejection like that. You send out short stories, they get rejected, many times probably before they get published. You submit to agents, you get rejections many times before you actually get one.
Well, the other thing that I know that happens, especially with the larger publishing houses, is they may find an agent or an editor at the publishing house may love the manuscript, but then they bring it to the board and they say, "Oh, I've got this great book. It's like The Incredible Journey, or whatever. It's like
Fantastic Voyage, yeah.
Fantastic Voyage. Sorry, meets a Jason Bourne kind of thing, or whatever, right? And it's this great concept, and they go, "Oh, but we just published a book where the people shrink." Or whatever. It doesn't even have to be even close to the book. They just go, "Oh, but we just did a book in that, and we only have room for 3 books this year, and we already have 3 of them lined up." So instead of saying, "Oh, maybe next year," they just take a pass, right? Even if they like it.
That's a really tough part as an author, when your books are making the rounds of the publisher, an agent's submitting them, and he's submitting them to good editors at big publishing houses, and you get feedback, and some of them will say, the non-linear way it was written didn't grab me, or I didn't feel the characters were well done, whatever they might say, just like a short story rejection. Or it could be closer to a form rejection. You don't know whether somebody in the publishing house said, "Yeah, we just had one like that, so we don't want to publish another one," or we don't know where that fits, so we don't know how we could promote it or sell it.
Right.
And that's the rejection that you often get from agents too. This is really good. I really like the concept, but I don't know who I could pitch it to.
Yeah, I don't have anyone to sell it to, right, in New York. Yeah.
I don't know who's looking for a book like that right now.
Right.
And so it's so tough when it comes to stuff like that.
So I think the good news, because I always try to be optimistic in that approach, is that you have plenty of manuscripts, meaning you don't have to choose one or the other. You can choose both, right? Some can go to agents while you're pursuing the other path. It's not you have one manuscript and, oh boy, what do I do with this one thing? So I think that's a benefit right there.
No, right. I mean, my first science fiction manuscript that I wrote is the Primus Labyrinth. That I have now self-published a little more than a month ago. My second one, I actually had the UK writer David Mitchell as a mentor at the time, and he helped me. Yeah, he's a brilliant writer, and he helped me crystallize the plot for that one, the main concept and some of the plot. But being that I was a big David Mitchell fan at the time, I kind of borrowed some of his several books in one book styles and made it too long. So I haven't pitched that one to agents, and I haven't self-published it. It's kind of twice as long as you would normally look for at least an early published book by an author. Maybe later on, once they've become established. And then my third one was the one that I had an agent for and was shipped around. Well, a couple of books, there are a couple of the other manuscripts that I pitched to agents now. And I'm not sure what to do with the one that was agented. Maybe that'll be the next one that I self-publish.
Cool. Now I want to go back to you as a voice talent, as a professional narrator, because you used the studio when you were working at the radio station.
Right.
But now you've got your own home studio, because I have had the privilege or luxury of getting to work with you as a voice talent, because you've done one of my books and you're working on a couple more.
Yeah, we're just about finished another novella from you in Canadian Werewolf in New York series.
So what was that like, setting up a home studio and then becoming a voice talent? Because you're on one end, you're the author doing all this stuff, and now you're the service provider for authors.
Well, first of all, I knew that I would not, getting out of the radio business as a career, I would not be making tons of money as a writer right off the bat. I probably needed a backup plan, and the backup plan was to do voice work, because I'd professionally essentially been doing that all my career, but for the radio station that I worked for. So I set up a studio that's only the size of a closet. It doesn't need to be any bigger than that. And the bigger, the worse, unless you're planning on doing interviews. So the main thing is to get it well sound insulated, get good sound insulation there, and then use good equipment. So I have I have a microphone that I was very familiar with as a radio announcer. It was the kind that I used back in the day, an Electro Voice microphone. So
Right.
I used that. And then it's a very quiet mic. It's a very high quality mic, but it's quiet. So it has to be boosted with a kind of preamp. And then you have to have an interface that hooks up with your computer so you can record on a laptop, which is what I use, a Mac. So I get all those things and get all that set up. And then it takes a while to adjust the sound and get used to working with the digital workstation, because I didn't produce my own commercials when I was in radio. We had a producer to do that. I just voiced them.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, you're not just the voice talent anymore, but you're the voice talent and the producer.
And that's the harder work.
So how do people find you? Where are you getting like I know you, so I got to reach out, but how do people find you normally?
Well, I mean, I'm with a few voice talent sites for doing commercials for television or radio or, internet, telephone, answering voicemail type things, whatever. I'm on a couple of different sites with that. And so people can find me through that, but I have my own website. So, if you're not searching them in the beginning, you might as well come straight to me. And that's what you got on the screen is scottoverton-voicetalent.com. And so my demos are on SoundCloud. The website itself has links to different demos of audiobooks or TV commercials or whatever it is that I think people might want. So they can listen to those and then reach out to me and we can work out. We can just say, I'll try to do maybe an audition for them and then see where it goes from there. So they can find me at that. I also am a voice talent for audiobook purposes through Findaway Voices. And that was thanks to you, Mark, because you had a connection with them. And so I thought, well, I'm going to check that out. So I have done voice work through them.
Okay.
They do take their cut, but they also have a very good system that makes it easy for both the client and the voice talent to work with. And they curate it. The author would go to them and say, look, I'm looking for this kind of a voice, and this is what the text is. And they curate it as far as saying, oh, I think we have some voice talents that would probably match that pretty well. So here's a handful. Listen to their demos, see which ones you might be interested in, then we'll reach out to them and see if they can do an audition for you.
Okay, cool. So are there specific, I know there's genres you prefer to write.
Yes.
Are there specific genres that you prefer to read? I know editors have preferred genres. So do you have a similar thing like that where there's something you're probably not going to do? Or
I haven't really thought about that. My voice is, as I've gotten older, slightly on the husky side. There's a bit of gravel in it. So it actually kind of works fairly well for your werewolf character, I think. But beyond that, I don't know. I think it would fit well with mysteries, especially noir kind of darker things or darker science fiction. I probably wouldn't want to get into really serious violence, gory horror, just because I wouldn't be that comfortable, or erotica either for that matter. I don't think. Beyond that, I haven't ruled out anything. I did a lot of what they call snapshots for Scribd, the subscription service.
Okay,
and that was through Findaway Voices. They have many nonfiction books, and they decided people might want 15 to 20 minute snapshots of those nonfiction books. So let's condense it down. It's like Reader's Digest condensations of these nonfiction books, but in audio form.
Oh, really? So like a full book. Let's say I didn't have time to read a Malcolm Gladwell something, and this is just a 20-minute summarization.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Many of them are 15. On average, I'd say they're probably 15 to 20 minutes, the ones that I did. I probably did more than 100 of those. And they had quite a few other voices doing them. So if you were a subscriber with Scribd, you could just listen to the snapshot instead of the actual book if you were pushed for time, But of course, you want to read the regular book, right? The whole book.
There were times in university
Paul's
where
notes.
I don't have time to read this Victorian novel. It's 1,000 pages long. What about just reading the summary so I can answer the questions?
Yeah, and then that's one way of doing it. I did all kinds of self-help books, especially business-oriented self-help books. Some of them were historical books. There was one about the Bataan Death March that I read. It was really intriguing.
I bet you learned a lot doing those.
There was a whole spectrum involved. Now that one was a killer because I had to look up all these Philippine pronunciations. But there's quite a range there.
Okay, cool. I'm just gonna remind the live viewers that we're taking questions right now. I think I've seen some comments. One of the ones is just a comment that came up from earlier on. Lynn said, "I've always had to avoid milk and sugar whenever I was doing any audio work.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I know I have theater kind of background too. I was trained in theater in a university and did some theater, and a bit of lemon juice in tea or water, good tip there. And also when your throat is rough, if it's having a hard time, a little bit of honey lemon tea was soothing as well as clear some of the clog. So yeah, those are good tips.
Excellent. And thanks for that, Lynn. So are you doing, you did Dead Air, you did the audiobook for that. Are you doing your new novel as well on audiobook? I'm intimidated.
It's just so much work involved in that. And you reached out to me to do your novella, and I had done a short story for you, and the novella is even about twice that, but that's only 20,000 words. I shouldn't feel intimidated because I think the Primus Labyrinth is around 90,000 words, 90 to 100,000.
Right.
So it's not that much bigger, but it feels bigger. So I haven't done it yet. I think I will. What I have done or started doing, based on your advice, is recording some of my short stories. I have self-published some of my short stories that were previously published, most of them in other venues, but decided to, once the rights reverted back to me, self-publish them in ebook form. And I know you have done that for some time, so I borrowed that idea and have been doing that. And I heard and saw a webinar that you had done just recently and thought, you mentioned recording them as audiobooks, and I thought, yeah, I really should do that. I really have no excuse. So I've started doing that.
Yeah, because you have two collections at least of short stories?
I actually have 5 collections of short stories, but I did 3 of them, like they're 3 stories, mini anthologies. Okay. So one is, first I did dark fiction, some darker fiction, right? And in a book called Body of Opinion, that was the name of one of the stories. And then I did 3 disaster stories because I love disaster stories. So I collected 3 of those, and the book is called Disastrous. And then I collected 3 other small anthologies that I call the Beyond series. Beyond the stars is space stories. Beyond time is time travel. Beyond technology is other related stories related to technology. And I gathered all 15 of those short stories into a print book, print on demand, that's just called Beyond Stories Beyond Space, Time, and Technology, or something like that.
Did you do an ebook version of all of them combined?
I did. I did not do that, and you've suggested I put them out as a box set, which I think was probably a good way to go. I think I would do that.
The thing I love about audio is because, well, especially because you have direct access to this voice talent that most of us don't have access to, is you can even release the short stories individually, and then also in the 3-book or 3-story collection, and then also in the larger set, because I think the larger set is more likely to sell on places like Audible, where a $15 credit is going to be, at least 15 hours of entertainment or reading, as opposed to, the first story you did for me, I think was 10,000 words.
10,000 words or so.
Yeah,
roughly,
I think maybe I sold 1 on Audible. Most of the money I made off of that is through library systems and other venues that don't require a $15 credit for obvious reasons.
Yeah. No, you're probably right about that. But you also pointed out that somebody just going for a quick run may want to listen to one story.
Yeah.
Well, that'd be about the right length of their run. So it is a good idea to make them available both ways, and I'm certainly going to work in that direction.
And then your name, you use Scott Overton as the writer, and you also use Scott Overton as the narrator, right? It's the exact same. So
yes, I do. I mean, well, I confuse people. That was partly too because it was with a whole radio career as Scott Overton. You know, that is a platform. People always talk about platform. What's your platform? Platform is how are you known to a potential book buying public. And I'm known as a radio announcer. If I have any platform and audience at all, it is people who knew me as a radio announcer. So I just stayed with the same name. Now that certainly would have applied for Dead Air because it was a radio themed novel. It was even set in Sudbury where I had worked. So, you know, that made perfect sense. But I've also kept with that. One difficulty that I have had to this point was that Dead Air is not science fiction, but I try to position myself as a science fiction writer.
Right.
And so that was that's always been a little bit of a glitch for me.
How did that transition work? Because Dead Air was your first novel, and then people were thinking, "Oh, this is great! I love this thriller set in Sudbury at a radio station." And then the next novel or the short story collection is like, "Oh my God, this is science fiction." Wait a second, where's
totally
Sudbury? Where's the radio guy?
Yeah, I think if there was any transition, it would be in short stories. And I don't know how many readers of Dead Air ever read any of my short stories, whether they read science fiction magazines or read the venues that were online. But that would be the kind of the transition for me. And then I've made it very clear that, you know, for instance, the Primus Labyrinth is science fiction. It's a science fiction premise, but it is also a thriller. And readers and some reviews have compared it to Michael Crichton or Dan Brown, who, you know, because it is that style. The science is not that heavy in it. It's not going to make your brain explode if you're not a real science geek. And the story depends on it. But I think that as a former broadcaster who explained information all through my career to people, I think that I managed to, you know, make it in a fairly readable, fairly accessible way. And with all of my science fiction, I try to do that. I'm certainly not going to try to make me sound smart because I'm not a scientist. I have to try to explain it in the clearest terms I can for the average reader.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, was there transition? I don't know that, you know, it's probably been awkward. I don't know how many people have followed me from Dead Air to the Primus Labyrinth or my short stories, but I created my website. Dead Air is available there in my website bookstore. It is right on my first page and has a dedicated page, but my blog on my website is science and science fiction related. So I'll find science related themes or events that are going on and try to connect them with how science fiction would look at them. A sort of a science fiction take on the latest science news.
Okay, cool. And is that because you're always doing reading in that area for ideas for fiction?
You know, I just thought that was a good way to position myself as an authoritative science fiction writer. So people would immediately know, hey, this guy definitely keeps read up on science. You know, he knows what's happening with SpaceX and the Falcon rocket and, you know, the latest astronomical discoveries or whatever, because he's blogging about them. And I don't blog as often as I could have, but that is the approach that I kind of take because I thought that was a good position to be in. What are you going to blog about? There are many writers who blog about how to write, but I think they missed the boat there. It doesn't seem to me that's your audience. Your audience is readers who want to read your mystery or your romance or your fantasy or whatever it is. And if your blog is about writing, then your audience there of your blog is just other writers. So that's just what made sense to me.
Okay, cool. Well, Scott, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with me today, share a bit of your writing background, your professional voice talent background. Where can people find out more about you and your books, and maybe even if they're looking for a great narrator?
Well, of course, my website, scottoverton.ca, is a fairly thorough website. There are links to all my, where they can get my books and my stories. They can find some free stories. They can listen to the stories or the Dead Air podcast. They can buy all of my ebooks right there online in EPUB or Mobi version for Kindle or Kobo. I switched them around there, but all my books are available too on Kobo, Amazon, through virtually every online venue there is, because I use Draft to Digital to publish wide. I do, and they get it to markets all over the world. So odds are, whatever market or sales channel you like to use to buy books, you can find my books there, and you can order the print books, the print on demand.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Scott, for joining me this afternoon, and have a fantastic day.
It's a great, great pleasure, Mark. Always good to talk to you.